The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, its envelope worn and dusty as if it had traveled through time itself. Sam Cooper stood in his downtown apartment, the city's morning traffic humming 20 floors below, and read the words that would change everything. His Uncle Thomas had left him the ranch. Not just any ranch, but the Cooper family's 2,000-acre spread in the heart of Texas Hill Country, where limestone cliffs meet endless sky and the wind carries stories of generations past. Sam's hands trembled slightly as he read further. The property was his, but it came with conditions. The ranch was drowning in debt from years of drought and declining cattle prices. The bank had given 6 months before foreclosure, 6 months to turn around a legacy that had taken a century to build. Sam walked to his window, staring at the concrete jungle he'd called home for 5 years. He'd left Texas at 18, convinced that real success meant skyscrapers and boardrooms, not barbed wire and dusty boots. His uncle had understood, or so Sam thought. Now, holding this letter, he wondered if Uncle Thomas had always known Sam would need to find his way back. The next morning, Sam loaded his car with everything that mattered and pointed it south. The 8-hour drive gave him time to remember. Summer visits to the ranch, riding horses across fields of bluebonnets, learning to mend fences under the brutal Texas sun. His uncle's weathered hands showing him how to read the land, how to listen to what the cattle needed, how to respect the rhythm of seasons. By the time Sam crossed into hill country, the landscape had transformed. Rolling hills stretched endlessly, dotted with live oak trees that had witnessed generations of Coopers working this soil. The air smelled different here, thick with cedar and possibility. He turned onto the familiar dirt road, his heart pounding. The ranch house appeared through the dust, its white paint peeling, its wraparound porch sagging slightly. But beyond it, the land rolled on in waves of gold and green, beautiful and wild and waiting. Sam parked and stepped out, his city shoes sinking into Texas earth. An older man stood by the barn, arms crossed, watching. This wasn't the homecoming Sam had imagined, and the look in that stranger's eyes told him this fight would be harder than any he'd faced in the city. The man by the barn introduced himself as Jake Martinez, the ranch foreman who'd worked beside Uncle Thomas for 30 years. His handshake was firm, his eyes measuring Sam with the kind of scrutiny that comes from a lifetime of judging livestock and weather. Jake didn't waste time with pleasantries. He walked Sam through the property, and with each step the reality grew heavier. The cattle herd had dwindled to barely 100 head, not enough to sustain operations. The fences needed repairs along every boundary line, miles of sagging wire and rotting posts. The main barn's roof had sections that would cave in with the next strong storm. The equipment shed housed tractors and machinery that belonged in a museum, rusting relics that ate money faster than they could earn it. Jake's voice remained steady as he laid out the numbers. Feed costs, veterinary bills, property taxes, and the crushing bank loan that Uncle Thomas had taken out 3 years ago during the worst drought in decades. The old man had bet everything on one more good year, but that year never came. Now the debt stood at $300,000, and the bank's patience had worn thin. Sam felt his business school education colliding with the harsh arithmetic of ranch life. In the city, he'd moved money around with keystrokes and conference calls. Here, every dollar represented feed for hungry cattle, medicine for sick animals, or repairs that couldn't wait. As they walked back toward the house, Jake finally asked the question that hung between them. Was Sam planning to sell? A development company from Austin had been circling for months, offering enough money to clear the debt and leave Sam with a comfortable profit. They wanted to turn the ranch into luxury estates, carving up the land into 5-acre plots for wealthy city folks seeking weekend retreats. Sam looked across the property, watching the afternoon sun paint the hills in shades of amber and gold. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals that had carried generations of birds across this same sky. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed, their voices ancient and familiar. He thought about Uncle Thomas, who'd never married, never had children, but had poured his life into this land. Every fence post, every water well, every carefully chosen breeding cow represented a decision, a hope, a piece of his uncle's heart. The man had left it all to Sam, not because Sam had earned it, but because Uncle Thomas believed in second chances. Sam turned to Jake, his jaw set with a determination he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't selling. Jake's weathered face didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Respect, maybe, or perhaps pity for the naive city boy who didn't know what he was choosing. Either way, Sam had made his decision, and there was no turning back now. The first week nearly broke him. Sam woke before dawn, his body screaming from muscles he'd forgotten existed. In the city, he'd gone to a gym 3 times a week. On the ranch, every moment was physical labor that made his previous workouts feel like gentle stretching. Jake had him mending fences, a task that seemed simple until Sam realized each post needed to be set 2 feet deep in Rocky Hill country soil. His hands blistered, then bled, then finally began to callous. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly, turning his neck red despite the hat Jake had tossed him. By noon each day, Sam's shirt was soaked through, and he understood why cowboys of old had looked the way they did in photographs, lean and weathered and tough as the land itself. The cattle presented their own education. Sam had to learn their rhythms, their needs, their individual personalities. One ornery bull named Diablo tested every fence Sam repaired, as if personally offended by the newcomer's presence. A pregnant cow needed special attention, her feed supplemented, her health monitored daily. Jake taught Sam to read the animals, to spot illness before it became critical, to understand that ranching wasn't about controlling nature, but working alongside it. The local feed store became Sam's classroom. Old-timers gathered there each morning, drinking coffee and trading stories. At first, they viewed Sam with open skepticism. Thomas Cooper's city nephew, they called him, the boy who'd run off to find fortune and now came crawling back because he'd inherited land he didn't deserve. Their words stung, but Sam kept showing up, kept asking questions, kept listening. Slowly, grudgingly, they began to share knowledge. One grizzled rancher showed Sam how to spot good grazing land. Another explained the intricacies of cattle auctions and how to avoid getting cheated. A woman who ran a neighboring ranch taught him about the importance of water rights and how disputes over creek access had shaped hill country politics for generations. Sam also met the banker, Mr. Harrison, a polished man who seemed perpetually disappointed. He reviewed the ranch's finances with the enthusiasm of a doctor delivering terminal news. The numbers were worse than Sam had imagined. Even with perfect conditions, breaking even would take years. Harrison suggested, not unkindly, that Sam consider the development company's offer. It was still on the table, he said, but it wouldn't be forever. That night, sitting on the sagging porch with a cold beer, Sam watched the stars emerge. The sky here was different from the city, vast and clear and filled with more stars than seemed possible. He thought about his uncle, sitting in this same spot, looking at this same sky, facing his own moments of doubt. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote howled and the cattle stirred restlessly. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Sam was struggling to fix the barn's ancient water pump when a truck pulled up the drive. A young woman stepped out, her boots worn but practical, her long dark hair pulled back in a braid. She introduced herself as Elena Vasquez, a veterinarian who'd worked with Uncle Thomas for years. Her family had ranched in the area for 5 generations, and she'd grown up knowing every corner of this land. Elena had heard Sam was trying to save the ranch, and she'd come with an offer. She needed a place to keep some rescue horses she'd taken in, animals that had been neglected but weren't sick enough for the shelter. If Sam would provide pasture and basic care, she'd reduce her veterinary fees for his cattle and help him develop a better herd management system. It was exactly the kind of partnership Sam needed, and he accepted immediately. Over the following weeks, Eleanor became an invaluable resource. She knew which local auctions offered the best deals on healthy cattle. She understood the complex web of relationships between hill country ranchers and could navigate disputes that Sam didn't even know existed. More importantly, she believed in what he was trying to do. She'd seen too many family ranches sold off to developers, the land carved up and lost forever. Another ally emerged in an equally surprising form. A teenager named Marcus appeared one Saturday morning asking for work. He'd just turned 16, lived in town with his grandmother, and desperately needed money to save for college. Uncle Thomas had employed his older brother years ago, and Marcus hoped Sam might do the same. Sam hesitated. He could barely afford to pay Jake, let alone take on another worker, but Marcus was persistent, and something in his determination reminded Sam of himself at that age. They struck a deal. Marcus would work weekends and after school, learning ranching skills in exchange for modest pay. The boy proved to be a quick study, eager to learn and unafraid of hard work. Together, this unlikely team began to transform the ranch. Jake brought decades of experience and connections throughout the ranching community. Elena provided medical expertise and business insight. Marcus brought youthful energy and a willingness to try new approaches. Sam contributed his business education, applying modern management techniques to century-old problems. They started small. Sam negotiated better feed prices by joining a cooperative buying group Elena recommended. Marcus helped repair equipment that Jake had written off as hopeless, the boy's familiarity with YouTube tutorials proving surprisingly valuable. They implemented a rotation grazing system that improved pasture health while reducing feed costs. Progress was slow but real. The herd's health improved under Elena's care. Fences got mended, buildings got patched, and the ranch began to look less like a disaster and more like a working operation. But the financial pressure remained crushing. Every gain was immediately consumed by existing debts and ongoing expenses. As word spread that Sam was serious about saving the ranch, the community's reaction split sharply. Some locals admired his determination and began offering quiet support. They'd stop by with surplus hay or offer advice on managing specific pastures. These were people who understood that every family ranch that survived was a victory against the relentless tide of development sweeping across Texas. But others saw Sam's efforts differently. The development company had promised jobs and economic growth. They'd shown renderings of beautiful homes nestled among the hills, a golf course, a community center. For a town that had seen its young people leave for city opportunities, development represented hope of a different kind. The town's mayor, a businessman named Robert Chen, publicly supported the development. At a community meeting, he argued that hill country needed to evolve. Family ranching was a dying industry, he claimed, and clinging to the past meant accepting decline. Sam attended that meeting and listened to his neighbors debate his future. Some spoke passionately about preserving agricultural heritage and the importance of open spaces. Others countered with economic realities, talking about their own struggling businesses and the need for new residents with money to spend. One heated exchange particularly stung. A woman whose family had sold their ranch 5 years earlier accused Sam of selfishness. She said her father had fought to keep their land too, had worked himself into exhaustion, had died still in debt. Selling had been the hardest decision of her life, but it had freed her family from crushing financial pressure. Who was Sam to judge those who chose survival over sentiment? Sam had no good answer. That night he sat with Jake on the porch, watching distant lightning illuminate clouds over the hills. The old foreman rolled a toothpick between his teeth. A habit Sam had learned meant Jake was working through something difficult. Finally, Jake spoke. He'd worked this land for 3 decades, had seen the Cooper family through good years and terrible ones. He'd buried his own father in the small cemetery on the property's north edge, alongside 4 generations of Coopers and ranch hands who'd given their lives to this soil. Jake said he understood why people sold. Ranching was brutal, unforgiving, and increasingly impossible in an economy that valued suburban sprawl over cattle. But he also knew that once land was developed, it was lost forever. The hawks would find new hunting grounds. The wildflowers would grow only in carefully preserved patches. The silence that came with dusk on open prairie would be replaced by the sounds of lawn mowers and air conditioners. The question, Jake said, wasn't whether Sam could save the ranch. It was whether saving it mattered enough to justify the sacrifice it would require. Not just from Sam, but from everyone who depended on him. Spring brought drought. For 6 weeks, clouds built on the horizon but never released their rain. The grasslands turned brown earlier than usual, and water sources that should have been full ran low. Sam watched his carefully rebuilt herd struggle, their weight dropping as the pastures failed to provide adequate nutrition. Supplemental feed became essential, and the costs mounted daily. Then Diablo, the ornery bull, broke through a fence during a particularly hot afternoon and led a dozen cows onto neighboring property. The neighbor, a man named Dutch Keller, who'd made clear his dislike for Sam, called the sheriff and demanded compensation for damages. By the time Sam and Marcus rounded up the cattle, Keller had documented every trampled fence post and crushed garden bed. The bill he presented was clearly inflated, but Sam had no choice but to negotiate. They settled on a number that drained Sam's emergency fund to nearly nothing. At that week's meeting with Mr. Harrison, the banker delivered the news Sam had been dreading. The ranch was falling behind on loan payments. Harrison couldn't extend any more grace periods. Unless Sam could make a substantial payment within 30 days, foreclosure proceedings would begin. The development company had increased their offer, Harrison added, sensing Sam's desperation. They were now willing to pay enough to clear the debt and leave Sam with $100,000. It was more than generous, Harrison said. It was an escape. Sam left the bank in a daze. He drove back to the ranch, parked by the house, and just sat in his truck. Everything he'd worked for over the past 5 months felt suddenly fragile, built on hope rather than solid foundation. The phone rang. It was his former boss from the city, calling with a job offer. A position had opened up, a promotion from what Sam had left behind. The salary would be more than enough to clear his personal debts and start over. His old life was still available if he wanted it. Sam looked across the property. Marcus was in the distance, repairing yet another section of fence. Elena's truck was parked by the barn, probably checking on the pregnant cow. Jake emerged from the equipment shed, wiping his hands on a rag, and saw Sam sitting motionless in the truck. The old foreman walked over, leaned against the door, and waited. Sam told him everything. The bank's ultimatum, Keller's inflated bill, the job offer, the weight of knowing that his stubbornness might cost not just himself, but everyone who'd believed in him. Jake listened without interrupting, his weathered face revealing nothing. When Sam finished, Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then he told Sam about the year the drought killed half Uncle Thomas's herd, about the year grasshoppers destroyed the hay crop, about the year cattle prices crashed and Thomas sold his truck to make payroll. Every generation faced their crisis point, Jake said. The question was never whether the crisis would come, but how you'd face it when it did. Sam spent that night going through Uncle Thomas's old records, papers the lawyer had boxed up months ago. Among the faded receipts and handwritten ledgers, he found something interesting. His uncle had started experimenting with specialty beef production years before. raising a small herd of grass-fed cattle targeted at high-end restaurants and health-conscious consumers. The margins were better than traditional beef, but it required more labor and careful management. Thomas had abandoned the project when the drought hit, unable to maintain the necessary pasture conditions. But what if Sam revived it? The ranch had good grass now, thanks to their rotation system. Elena had connections to several Austin restaurants through her veterinary practice, and there was growing demand for locally sourced, sustainably raised meat. Sam called an emergency meeting with his team. He laid out the idea and the numbers. They'd need to acquire about 30 specialized breeding cows, upgrade some infrastructure, and get certification for organic practices. The upfront costs would be significant, but the potential returns could save the ranch. Marcus immediately began researching online, finding success stories of other Texas ranches that had made similar transitions. Elena made calls to her restaurant contacts, several of whom expressed strong interest in reliable local suppliers. Jake remained skeptical, but admitted the plan had merit if they could execute it properly. The challenge was funding. Sam needed capital to acquire the breeding stock and cover expenses until the first harvest. He couldn't get another bank loan with his current debt situation. That's when Elena suggested crowdfunding. Her sister worked in marketing and had helped other agricultural projects raise money online. They could tell the ranch's story, offer special rewards to supporters, and tap into the growing movement of people who cared about sustainable food sources. Sam was hesitant. Making the ranch's struggles public felt like exposing weakness, but Elena argued they had nothing to lose. People responded to authentic stories of real people fighting for something meaningful. This wasn't charity, it was offering community members a chance to invest in their food system and preserve open space. They spent 2 weeks preparing. Elena's sister helped create a compelling video featuring Sam talking about his uncle's legacy while Marcus filmed the ranch at golden hour, the cattle silhouetted against dramatic Texas skies. Elena interviewed several chefs about why locally sourced beef mattered. Jake, initially camera-shy, delivered a powerful statement about what happens to communities when family ranches disappear. They set a goal of $75,000, enough to acquire the breeding stock and provide a buffer for the transition period. Supporters would receive everything from thank you notes to actual beef shares, depending on their contribution level. The campaign launched on a Monday morning. Sam watched the counter nervously, refreshing the page every few minutes. The first day brought 20 contributors and $8,000. The second day was slower. By the end of the first week, they'd raised barely a quarter of their goal, and momentum seemed to be stalling. The breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. A food blogger from Austin visited the ranch after seeing the crowdfunding campaign. She'd built a following, writing about sustainable agriculture and local food systems. She spent a day at the ranch, interviewing Sam and his team, photographing the operation, and even helping Marcus mend a fence. Her article went viral. She wrote about Sam's journey from corporate life to ranching, about Jake's decades of dedication, about Marcus's dreams of agricultural college, and about Elena's vision for veterinary practice that supported rather than just served ranches. She framed the Second Chance Ranch as representative of a larger question facing rural America. Could traditional ways of life adapt and survive in a changing economy? The response was overwhelming. Within 48 hours of the article's publication, the crowdfunding campaign reached its goal. By the end of the week, they'd exceeded it by $30,000. Messages poured in from across the country, people sharing their own family farm stories, expressing hope that places like the Second Chance Ranch could endure. Sam felt both humbled and energized. This wasn't just about his ranch anymore. It had become a symbol of something larger, a referendum on whether there was still room in modern America for the kind of life his uncle had lived. With the funds secured, they moved quickly. Elena identified a rancher in the hill country who was retiring and had exactly the kind of breeding stock they needed. Sam negotiated a fair price, and they arranged transport. The new cattle arrived on a crisp morning, their coats glossy and healthy, their genetics representing years of careful breeding for meat quality and hardiness. Jake supervised their integration with the existing herd, his practiced eye assessing each animal. Meanwhile, Marcus worked with a local organic certification agency, learning the detailed record-keeping and practice requirements. It was tedious work, but the certification would allow them to command premium prices. Elena coordinated with her restaurant contacts, several of whom committed to purchasing beef once production began. She also suggested they consider selling directly to consumers through a membership program, an idea that was gaining popularity in Texas cities. Mr. Harrison called, having heard about the successful campaign. His tone was different now, less pessimistic, more curious about Sam's plans. Sam walked him through the business model, the projected revenues, the timeline to profitability. Harrison didn't make any promises, but he agreed to hold off on foreclosure proceedings for another 6 months, giving the new strategy time to prove itself. For the first time since returning to Texas, Sam felt genuine optimism. The impossible task of saving the ranch suddenly seemed merely extremely difficult. He'd assembled a team, developed a viable plan, and demonstrated that people believed in what they were doing. The ranch still faced enormous challenges, but now they had resources and momentum. Success brought its own complications. The attention from the viral article attracted both support and scrutiny. Other struggling ranchers began reaching out, seeking advice or partnership. Some days, Sam spent more time on phone calls than doing actual ranch work. A local television station wanted to do a feature story. A sustainable agriculture conference invited Sam to speak on a panel. While Sam appreciated the interest, it was also overwhelming. The ranch work still demanded endless hours of physical labor, and now he had to balance that with being a spokesperson for a movement he hadn't intended to lead. The team dynamics also shifted. With money in the bank and real prospects ahead, everyone felt pressure to meet expectations. Marcus pushed himself too hard one week and ended up sick for 3 days, falling behind on his schoolwork. His grandmother called, worried, and suggesting maybe the ranch job was too much. Sam had to reassure her, while also recognizing that their success depended on not burning out the people who made it possible. Elena faced pushback from some traditional ranchers who viewed the specialty beef concept as pretentious and impractical. At a Cattlemen's Association meeting, one older rancher loudly proclaimed that beef was beef, and all this organic grass-fed talk was just marketing nonsense for city people with more money than sense. Elena held her ground, calmly explaining the science behind why management practices mattered for both animal welfare and meat quality. But the tension highlighted how the Second Chance Ranch was challenging established ways of thinking. Even Jake showed signs of stress. He'd spent his career working one way, and now everything was changing. New record-keeping systems, new feeding protocols, new marketing approaches. One evening, he admitted to Sam that he sometimes wondered if all this change was worth it, or if they were losing something essential by turning the ranch into what he called a boutique operation. Sam had to confront these doubts honestly. He gathered his team and addressed the challenges directly. Yes, they were under pressure. Yes, they were trying something different. Yes, they might fail, but they were also creating something authentic, building a model that could work not just for them, but for other ranchers facing similar choices. They were proving that tradition and innovation didn't have to be enemies. They spent that evening on the porch, sharing a meal Elena had prepared, talking through concerns and adjustments they needed to make. Marcus needed more flexibility with his schedule, and they agreed he'd work longer on weekends but take weekdays off for school. Elena suggested they document their processes better, creating resources other ranchers could learn from. Jake proposed mentoring younger ranchers interested in sustainable practices, a way to pass on knowledge while building community. A thunderstorm rolled in that night, the first real rain in weeks. They sat under the porch roof, watching lightning dance across the sky, listening to rain drum on the metal barn roof. The earth soaked up moisture it desperately needed, and the air smelled clean and full of possibility. 18 months after Sam had arrived, with nothing but determination and a mountain of debt, the Second Chance Ranch held its first official harvest. The specialty cattle had reached optimal weight, their meat tested and certified organic, their quality exceeding even Elena's expectations. Sam had negotiated contracts with 5 Austin restaurants, each committed to featuring Second Chance beef on their menus, with the ranch's story as part of their appeal. The harvest day itself was bittersweet. Sam had spent months caring for these animals, learning their personalities, ensuring their welfare. Jake had prepared him for this moment, explaining that ranching meant accepting the full cycle of life and death, that respect for animals meant giving them good lives and humane ends. The mobile processing unit arrived at dawn, a service that allowed on-site processing to minimize stress on the animals. By evening, the first batch of beef was packaged and ready for distribution. The following week brought the financial reckoning. After expenses, the harvest generated enough revenue to make a significant payment on the ranch's debt. It wasn't enough to clear everything, but it was substantial progress. More importantly, it proved the model worked. The restaurants loved the quality and were already discussing increasing their orders. The direct-to-consumer membership program had a waiting list. Demand exceeded supply, exactly what Sam had hoped for. Mr. Harrison reviewed the numbers with genuine approval. He restructured the remaining loan on better terms, acknowledging that the Second Chance Ranch had transformed from a failing operation into a viable business. The foreclosure threat disappeared, replaced by discussions of sustainable growth and long-term planning. The community's attitude shifted as well. Even Mayor Chen, who'd advocated for development, acknowledged that what Sam had accomplished was impressive. The ranch was now employing local people, attracting positive attention to the area and demonstrating that agricultural operations could thrive with modern approaches. Marcus received early acceptance to Texas A&M's agricultural program with a scholarship. The recommendation letter Sam wrote for him practically wrote itself. Elena expanded her veterinary practice, hiring an assistant and taking on more ranch clients who wanted to learn sustainable practices. Jake, now in his 60s, talked about eventually retiring, but not yet. He wanted to see this ranch succeed for another decade at least. Sam stood on the porch one evening watching the sun set over hills that had become deeply familiar. The ranch would never be easy. Weather, markets, and 1,000 unpredictable challenges would always threaten. But they'd built something resilient, something that honored Uncle Thomas's legacy while adapting to modern realities. The phone in his pocket buzzed. Another inquiry from a struggling rancher asking for advice. Sam smiled and answered the call. The Second Chance Ranch had become more than a property or a business. It was proof that with determination, community, and willingness to adapt, tradition could survive and thrive in a changing world. And that legacy was worth any sacrifice.